How could an employee of a wealthy CEO not afford to eat? Robert Hayes stepped through the glass doors of his own cafe, 2 hours from corporate headquarters, disguised in an old hoodie and jeans. A little gray streaked his hair, a trimmed beard framed his jaw, and thick-rimmed glasses hid the sharp eyes that usually stared down boardroom tables. No one would peg him as the CEO of a 12-store chain spanning 3 states. He'd built this company from a single location, poured his soul into it, and for years he believed his employees were treated right. Fair wages, decent hours, a culture he could be proud of. But lately, the reports didn't add up. Low morale, climbing turnover, whispers of financial struggles despite full-time work. His district managers swore it was just grumbling, nothing serious. Robert wasn't buying it. He needed the truth, and he'd get it himself. The place smelled of coffee and toasted bread, but the air felt heavy, like something was off. Employees shuffled through their tasks with robotic precision. A cashier flashed a practiced smile at a customer, then let it fall the second they turned away. Robert approached the counter, hands in his pockets, pretending to scan the menu overhead. A young woman, mid-20s maybe, greeted him with a faint nod. Her name tag read Linda. "Hey there, welcome in. What can I get you?" Her voice was polite but hollow, like she'd said it 1,000 times today. "I'll take a coffee and a breakfast sandwich," Robert said, keeping his tone casual. Linda punched it into the register, her fingers moving fast despite the dark circles under her eyes. Then, under her breath, she muttered, "Wish I could afford one of those." Robert's chest tightened. He glanced at her, but she was already turning to grab his order, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. His stomach twisted as she handed him the coffee, her uniform hanging loose like she'd lost weight she couldn't spare. "Long shift?" he asked, testing the waters. Linda let out a dry laugh. "Double shift. Gotta make rent." She hesitated, then added, "I pick them up whenever I can. Last paycheck barely cover my bills." Robert's grip on the cup tightened. He knew what he paid his people, or thought he did. Full-time should mean enough to live on. Not this. Before he could dig deeper, a sharp voice cut through. "Linda, break's over. Let's go." A man in his late 40s stormed up, arms crossed. Name tag reading Carl, shift manager. He glared at Linda like she'd stolen something. She sighed, muttered, "Coming," and hurried to the back. Robert's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a tired worker. Something was rotten here, and he needed to see it all. He found a seat near the corner, stirring his coffee absently as he watched the place hum along. Customers came and went, served with stiff politeness. The only flickers of life came when employees traded quiet jokes or quick smiles before snapping back to the grind. Linda reappeared 15 minutes later, wiping tables and refilling napkin holders without a word from anyone. She moved like she was holding the place together single-handedly, but no one noticed. Then Carl swaggered over, his voice low but cutting. "Speed it up, Linda. We got a rush coming." She nodded and darted to the register as a line formed. Robert watched her handle order after order, exhaustion etched into every move. Then it happened. A woman in a business suit frowned at her cup. "Excuse me, I asked for oat milk, not regular." Linda blinked, flustered. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me fix that." Before she could move, Carl was there. "What happened?" His tone was tight. "I must have grabbed the wrong," Linda started. "We can't afford mistakes," Carl snapped. "You know how much those ingredients cost. That's coming out of your paycheck." Robert's hand froze around his cup. Linda's face fell, but she didn't argue. The customer shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think that's necessary. It's a small mistake, and she's fixing it." Carl flashed a fake smile. "Don't worry, ma'am. We hold our employees accountable." Linda pressed her lips together, swallowing whatever she wanted to say. Robert tossed his half-finished coffee in the trash. Observation wasn't enough anymore. He needed to get inside this mess. The next morning, Robert showed up in a cheap polo and jeans, a fake resume in hand, claiming he was a retail vet looking for steady work. He'd applied online days earlier, and they'd bitten fast, too fast. Carl barely glanced at the paper during the interview. "Ever worked food service?" "A little, mostly retail," Robert said, keeping it vague. "Not hard to learn. Carl muttered. We need people who show up and don't cause trouble. Minimum wage, okay? Robert's gut churned, but he nodded. Yeah, that's fine. Good. Sign here. You start tomorrow. No questions, no real process, just a rush to fill a slot. Robert's first shift confirmed everything he feared. Training was a joke. A kid named Tommy, barely 2 months in, showed him the ropes. Hit this for coffee, this for sandwiches. If they want something fancy, just guess, Tommy said with a shrug. The store was a skeleton crew. Orders piling up, everyone scrambling. Linda darted between tasks like she was 3 people. Carl barked orders, but did nothing himself, blaming anyone nearby when things went wrong. Robert overheard 2 workers near the back. They shorted me again, one grumbled. 3rd time this month. You tell Carl. You get written up, the other replied. No thanks. This wasn't mismanagement. It was a pressure cooker, and it was happening under his name. Robert lingered after his shift, pretending to check the schedule. Linda grabbed her bag, hesitating by the door. See you tomorrow, Tommy called. Yeah, she said, her smile weak. If I can't afford the bus fare. Robert's stomach dropped. She wasn't kidding. This was his company, and his people were breaking. He couldn't just watch anymore. He had to act. Hey folks, if you're stunned as I am by what Robert's seeing, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Let's see where this goes. Robert's first shift, as a grunt hit him like a slap in the face. He stood behind the counter in that cheap polo, palms sweaty, watching the chaos unfold. Tommy, the kid tasked with training him, barely knew the ropes himself. Okay, this button's for coffee, Tommy said, jabbing at the register. This one's sandwiches. If they ask for something weird, just wing it. He flashed an apologetic grin. You'll catch on. Robert nodded, but his gut sank. 2 months on the job, and Tommy was already the veteran showing him up. The store ran on fumes. Too few hands, too many orders. Linda darted between the register and the kitchen, her face tight with focus, picking up slack no one else could. The line grew fast. Customers huffed, tapping their feet, while Robert fumbled through his first few orders. He punched the wrong button twice, and a guy in a trucker hat snapped. You new or just slow? Robert forced a smile. New. Sorry about that. Linda swooped in, fixed it without a word, and moved on. She was everywhere, wiping spills, restocking cups, taking heat from the crowd like it was her job to carry the whole damn place. Robert watched her jaw tight. This wasn't hustle. This was survival. Carl lurked in the background, arms crossed, eyes narrow. He didn't lift a finger when the rush hit, just barked at anyone who lagged. Move it, Tommy. We're not paying you to stand there. Tommy flinched, scurrying to the coffee machine. Robert's blood simmered. Carl wasn't managing. He was bullying. Then it got worse. A woman in a yoga outfit waved her cup, voice sharp. This is cold. I waited 10 minutes for this. Before Robert could respond, Carl was on him. What did you do, newbie? You're costing us here. Wasn't me, Robert said, keeping his cool. Machine's slow. Then figured out. Carl shot back, turning away. Linda slipped over, swapped the cup, and muttered, Don't sweat it. He's always like that. Robert's fists clenched under the counter. Always like that. This guy was the problem, and he was running Robert's store into the ground. The rush finally died down, leaving the crew ragged. Robert wiped down the counter, ears open. 2 workers huddled near the pastry case, voices low. They shorted me again last week, one said, a guy with tired eyes and a faded apron. $40 gone. Tell Carl. He'll write you up for complaining. The other replied, a woman with a ponytail and a pinched frown. Happened to me twice already. Robert's stomach turned. Missing wages weren't a glitch, they were a pattern. He glanced at Carl, now scrolling his phone by the office door, oblivious or uncaring. This wasn't just about Linda anymore. The whole team was bleeding, and Carl was holding the knife. Mid-shift, a delivery guy banged on the back door, arms full of boxes. Carl waved at Robert. Handle it, newbie. Robert hauled the load in, stacking coffee beans and napkins in the cramped storage room. Linda appeared, grabbing a crate to help. You don't have to, he said. Someone's gotta, she replied, voice flat. Carl won't. She hefted the box, wincing as she turned. Robert caught the strain in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped. You okay? He asked. She shrugged. Just tired. Been on my feet since 6. Double today. Her words hit like bricks. Double shifts weren't a choice. They were a necessity. He wanted to ask more, but Carl's voice cut through. Linda, front needs you. She sighed and shuffled off, leaving Robert alone with the boxes and a growing fire in his chest. The day dragged on, a blur of orders and snap commands. Robert kept his head down, watching Carl's every move. The guy thrived on control, sniping at Tommy for a spilled lid, docking Linda's brake when she took an extra minute to breathe. Then came the real kick in the teeth. A customer, some suit with a loud voice, got his sandwich wrong. Bacon instead of sausage. He shoved it back across the counter. This ain't what I ordered. Linda, at the register, paled. I'm so sorry, Al. Carl stormed over, cutting her off. What's the holdup? He snatched the receipt, eyes blazing. Bacon's $3 more than sausage. That's coming out of your check, Linda. Be sharper next time. Robert's pulse pounded. It was my mistake, he lied, stepping up. I rang it wrong. Carl wheeled on him. Then you're both idiots. Fix it. He stomped off, leaving Linda to remake the order, her hand shaking. The suit smirked, satisfied, while Linda whispered, "Thanks for trying." Robert didn't answer. He couldn't. His own company, and this was how it ran, pennies pinched from people who couldn't spare them. Late afternoon, the pace slowed. Robert lingered near the coffee station, catching snippets of talk. Tommy sidled up, wiping his hands on his apron. You get used to the crazy, he said, half smiling. Least we've got each other. Yeah, Robert said, forcing a nod. How long you been here? 2 months. Feels like 2 years. Tommy chuckled, but his eyes were dull. Linda's the real trooper, though. She's been here forever. Keeps it all together. Robert glanced at her across the room, refilling sugar packets with machine-like focus. She's good at it, he said. Too good. Tell me about it, Tommy replied. She deserves a medal, or at least a raise. He paused, then lowered his voice. You hear anything about the pay stuff? People say it's been off for months. Robert kept his face neutral. Heard some grumbling. You? Same. I'm short $20 this week. Not much, but adds up. Tommy shrugged. Can't do much about it. Why not? Robert pressed. Carl. He'll just say it's our fault. Write us up. Happened to Linda once. She argued, got a warning. She stopped fighting after that. Robert's jaw tightened. A warning for asking what she was owed. This place wasn't just broken, it was rigged. He watched Linda stack cups, her movements precise despite the weight dragging her down. She didn't complain, didn't slack, didn't quit. She just kept going, holding up a system that didn't give a damn about her. Something twisted deep in Robert's gut. Not just anger, but shame. This was his store, his name on the sign, and he let it come to this. The shift ended with a whimper, the last customers trickling out. Robert stayed late, pretending to mop the floor near the back. Linda grabbed her bag, lingering by the door. Night, Tommy, she called. Night, he replied. You got bus fare? She forced a smile. Barely. See you. She slipped out, and Robert watched her go, her thin frame disappearing into the dusk. What else was waiting out there for her? A cold apartment? An empty fridge? He didn't know, but he needed to. Carl locked up, whistling like he'd won something, while Robert swept the same spot over and over, mind racing. This wasn't the end of it. Something worse was coming. He could feel it, and when it hit, he'd be ready. Robert's second day on the job started early, the sun barely up as he clocked in. The store was quieter now, but the tension clung like damp air. He'd spent the night tossing and turning, Linda's words about bus fare and Tommy's casual shrug over missing pain gnawing at him. This wasn't just a bad manager or a rough patch. This was systematic, and it was on him to figure out how deep it went. He pulled on his apron, eyes scanning for Carl. The guy wasn't around yet, but his shadow loomed over everything. The way Tommy jumped at every loud noise, the way Linda kept her head down like she was waiting for the next hit. The morning crawled by, a steady trickle of customers keeping Robert busy at the register. He was getting the hang of it, punching orders with less hesitation, but his mind wasn't on the coffee. He watched Linda move through her tasks, restocking, cleaning, jumping in when a new hire stumbled. She was good, damn good, and it pissed him off that no one seemed to care. Around 10, Carl rolled in, tie loose, coffee cup in hand like he'd just strolled out of bed. "Morning, slackers," he said, smirking. "Hope you didn't burn the place down." Tommy forced a laugh. Linda didn't even look up. Robert kept his mouth shut, but his hands tightened on a stack of cups. Carl disappeared into the office, and Robert saw his chance. He slipped to the back, pretending to grab napkins, and peeked through the cracked door. Carl sat at the desk, flipping through a ledger, numbers, schedules, payroll sheets. Robert squinted, catching a glimpse of Linda's name, a red mark next to it. Then Carl scribbled something, crossed it out, and pocketed a pen. Robert's pulse quickened. He wasn't just barking orders. He was cooking the books. Back at the counter, Robert leaned toward Tommy. "Ever see Carl mess with the payroll?" Tommy frowned, wiping down the espresso machine. "Not really. He's always in there, though. Says it's manager stuff." "What?" "Just curious," Robert said, keeping it light. But his mind raced. If Carl was fudging numbers, that explained the shorted checks. He needed proof, something solid. The day stretched on, and Robert kept his eyes peeled. During a lull, he volunteered to take out the trash, a job no one fought him for. Out back, he dug through the bins, not for garbage, but for anything Carl might have tossed. Under a pile of coffee grounds, he found it. A crumpled payroll slip, Linda's name at the top. Hours logged, 48. Pay recorded, 35. 13 hours gone, shaved off like they never happened. Robert's breath caught. This wasn't a mistake. It was theft. He stuffed the paper in his pocket, heart hammering. Back inside, he caught Linda's eye as she swept the floor. She looked worn thin, her cheeks hollow, her steps slow. He wanted to tell her, show her, but not yet. He needed more, needed to know how far this went. Carl's voice broke his thoughts. "Newbie, quit daydreaming. Front's a mess." Robert nodded, grabbing a rag, but his mind was elsewhere. This was bigger than one store, bigger than Carl. He'd trusted the wrong people, and it was eating his company alive. The realization settled in heavy as the afternoon wore on. Robert worked the register, but his thoughts churned. He'd spent years building this chain, preaching fairness, believing his managers carried that torch. Now he saw the truth. He'd been blind, too far from the ground to see the rot. Linda's quiet efficiency mocked him. She was the backbone here, and he'd let her crumble. Tommy shrugged off losses stung too, a kid barely out of high school, already numb to getting screwed. Robert's chest ached with it, the weight of his own failure. Could he fix this? Or was it too late to undo the damage he'd ignored? Dusk fell, the store dimming as the last customers trickled out. Robert stayed late again, mopping near the back, waiting for a moment alone. Linda clocked out, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She paused by the trash bins, glancing around before reaching in. Robert froze, mop handle gripped tight as she pulled out a half-eaten sandwich from a customer's tray. She unwrapped it quick, took a bite, and shoved the rest in her pocket like a thief. His throat closed up. This wasn't exhaustion or low pay. This was hunger, raw and real, right in front of him. She didn't see him watching, just wiped her hands and headed for the door. "Night," she called to Tommy, voice steady like nothing happened. "Night," Tommy replied, oblivious. She slipped out, and Robert stood there, the mop dripping on the floor. His knees felt weak, his stomach sick. Linda, his employee, his responsibility, was eating garbage because she couldn't afford food. The payroll slip burned in his pocket, a smoking gun, but it wasn't enough anymore. This was personal now, a line crossed he couldn't unsee. He had to end it, had to make it right, not just for her, but for all of them. But how? One store, one manager. He could handle that. What if this was everywhere? Carl locked up, whistling again, smug as ever. Robert watched him go, then leaned against the wall, head spinning. He thought of the other 11 stores, the dozens of managers, the hundreds of workers. If Carl was bold enough to pull this here, what were the others doing? The district managers who'd fed him rosy reports. Were they in on it? Covering it up? His company, his legacy, teetering on a cliff he hadn't even known was there. This wasn't just a bad day or a bad hire. This was a reckoning. Linda's face flashed in his mind, the sandwich wrapper crinkling in her hand, and he felt it, the bottom dropping out. Had he lost it all already? Was there anything left to save? Robert didn't sleep that night. Linda's words echoed in his head. Bus fare, double shifts, paychecks that didn't stretch. Carl's smug face flashed behind his eyes, the way he'd doctor pay over a cup of milk. The store's chaos replayed like a bad movie. Understaffed, undertrained, undervalued. This wasn't the company he'd built. By morning, his mind was set. He pulled on a tailored blazer and pressed shirt. No disguise this time, and drove back to the store. The second he walked in, the air shifted. Employees glanced up, confused. Carl, leaning on the counter, frowned. "Can I help you?" Robert ignored him, eyes landing on Linda. She fumbled with the register, counting change with trembling fingers, exhaustion carved into her face. He stepped closer, voice calm but firm. "Yes, Carl. You can explain why my employees can't afford food." Silence crashed over the room. Linda froze. Tommy, wiping a table, stopped mid-motion. Carl let out a short, nervous laugh. What are you talking about?" "I've been here 2 days," Robert said, his tone cutting through the quiet. "Working your shifts, seeing it all, the way you treat people, the missing wages, the intimidation, and worst of all, good folks struggling under your watch." Carl's face drained of color. "Wait, you worked here?" Robert turned to Linda. "Is it true your paycheck barely covers your bills?" Her eyes flicked to Carl, then back to Robert. She hesitated, trapped. "It's okay," he said, softer now. "Speak freely." She swallowed hard. "Yeah, it's true." Robert's jaw tightened. He faced the others. "Anyone else had pay shorted?" A pause. Then Tommy raised a hand. Another followed. Then another. Carl sputtered. "Look, I don't know what they're saying. Payroll handles that." "Payroll reports to you?" Robert snapped. "And I checked. The discrepancies are all under your store." Carl's mouth opened, then shut, his face reddening. Robert turned to Linda. "How much you got in your bank account right now?" She blinked, caught off guard. Maybe $20. He exhaled, pulled out his wallet, and handed her a $100 bill. "For your bus fare." Her hand shook as she took it, stunned. Then he faced Carl. "You're done here." Carl scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I am. You're fired. Effective immediately." "You can't just—" Carl started, but Robert cut him off. "I own this company. I built it, and I won't let you ruin what it's supposed to be." Carl's hands clenched, his breathing heavy, but he saw the steel in Robert's eyes. With a curse, he ripped off his name tag, threw it on the counter, and stormed out. The room stayed quiet, tension hanging thick. Robert turned to the staff. "Starting today, things change. Submit reports if you've lost wages. You'll get every cent back. Pay raises are coming. And from now on, you'll be treated with respect." Linda, still dazed, murmured, "You mean it?" "I do," Robert said. "And I'm sorry it took me this long." She let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." He rolled up his sleeves and stepped behind the counter. "Now, let's get to work." The store felt different with Carl gone. A weight lifted, though uncertainty lingered. Employees stood still, like they were waiting for a catch. Robert knew promises weren't enough. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Let's talk." No one moved at first, then Linda stepped up. "Honestly, we need more staff. Half the time, we're barely covering shifts." Tommy nodded. "Yeah, and training's a mess. People quit because they're thrown in blind." Another voice piped up. "And the schedules, Carl changed them last minute. Expected us to just deal." Robert listened, every word sinking in. "Here's the plan," he said. "We're hiring more people. No more skeleton crews. Training's getting fixed. Every new hire gets real onboarding. Tommy, you've been here a couple months. Want to help build a program that actually works?" Tommy blinked. "Me? Yeah, I'd love that." Robert smiled faintly. Should have asked sooner. He turned to Linda. "Schedules are stable starting today. No more surprises. Need time off, you'll get it. And pay's going up across the board. No one working full-time should be scraping by." A stunned silence hit. Then Linda laughed shakily. "This doesn't feel real." Tommy grinned. "Are we dreaming?" "No dream," Robert said. "Just fixes overdue." He glanced around. "And I'm not stopping here. I'm hitting every store. If this is happening here, it's happening elsewhere. That ends now." Hope flickered in their faces. Linda's most of all. "If you're serious," she said, "we'll back you up. We want this place to work." "I am," Robert replied. And I'm not going anywhere. 2 weeks later, Robert returned. No disguise, just checking in. The difference hit him immediately. The tension was gone. Linda greeted customers with a real smile. Tommy walked a new hire through the system, calm and clear. The schedule on the wall showed no chaos. Progress. Back again, Linda asked, smirking. Wanted to see it myself, Robert said. She nodded. Fair enough. Tommy jogged over. You weren't kidding. We got 2 new hires last week. First time in months we're not running on fumes. Good, Robert said. Training. Way better, Tommy replied. Newbies aren't panicking anymore. Robert turned to Linda. And you? She exhaled. Better. It's we're not being dead tired every shift. Still getting used to someone up top caring. Should have been that way all along, Robert said. Before he could say more, James Sullivan, his regional manager, stepped in, looking tense. Robert, we need to talk. There's a situation. What kind? Robert asked, stomach tightening. Other stores, James said quietly. Some managers aren't happy about the changes. Say the wage hikes cut their budgets, mess with their targets. They're pushing back. Robert's jaw clenched. Which stores? James handed over a tablet. Robert skimmed the list. Older locations, longtime managers who liked the old ways. I'll visit them myself, he said. Personally? James asked. Personally. He handed the tablet back, then turned to Linda and Tommy. Keep this place running. It's proof change works. Linda smirked. Proof we were right all along. Robert chuckled. That too. He stepped outside, resolve hardening. One store wasn't enough. He'd face down every manager who resisted. This company was moving forward, with or without them. Folks, this is just the beginning. Subscribe now, hit that like, and comment below. What would you do as CEO? Let's keep this story alive.